Hey Podcast Babe, welcome to season 9 of the Podcast Babes podcast. My name is Anna Klasse, host of this pod and founder of the Podcast Babes. Every week, I interview and inspire a female podcaster here who has made her podcast work for her and her business. So tune in to learn from her mistakes, create your own profitable podcast. Here's today's episode. Hey Podcast Babe, welcome. Today I'm here with Emily Cassel. She is the host of Like Nobody's Business. That's the name of her podcast. And she's had this podcast for a while. I saw that, I think she's at episode 120 at the time of recording this. So Emily is a pretty experienced podcaster. I'm super excited to have her on the show today. So first of all, Emily, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Me too. I'm so excited to hear a little bit more about your podcast journey. Maybe to kick us off, can you tell me a little bit more about Like Nobody's Business? What is it? What is it about? What do you discuss? Give us some background info.
Yeah, so Like Nobody's Business is my second podcast, actually. The first one was called Sexy Soulful Success, and that one ran from 2017, I believe, through 2021 or 2021. And then we shifted gears, kind of rebranded, started a whole new feed, and created Like Nobody's Business. So originally it was about how can, like, when I first started it and relaunched the podcast, we had these monthly themes and they were almost like a self-study on certain topic areas. So we did one month that was like time, and then every month we did something that was like on top of it was 1 week. So getting on top of your time, like what are the techniques, the methods, the strategies for that, on top of it, over it, under it, and through it. So we did that as like the format for the first couple of months of the show, which was kind of fun and like experimental because I was in this flow for years that started to feel a little bit stale to me. As the person creating it, like I knew it was probably very valuable for my people, but I was just like, okay, we do a lot of like interviews and a lot of solo stuff. And like, what else could we do? How could we switch this up, make it more innovative, make it more interesting? Have it really be a great resource for people? Because it felt like we were just doing a lot of like the same stuff over and over, which, we don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time, which is kind of what I learned in the process. Because eventually you kind of like run out of themes, right? So we did that for like the first season of the podcast when we brought it back in 2021 under Like Nobody's Business. But really the goal is to have innovative, intentional conversations with innovative women entrepreneurs who are really shifting their industries, who are creating a category of one, who are doing things differently, and who are really devoted to the evolutionary and transformational process of leading and building a company that is distinctly and uniquely theirs and is an expression of what they came here to do, their own mission, their own multidimensionality, their own genius. And so we have conversations like that to really help listeners expand their mind, expand their vision, expand what's possible for them so that they can start to, really evolve themselves in their own ways and take pieces of advice and take pieces of ideas or strategies from those conversations and apply it to whatever they're doing in their own unique way. And the title, Like Nobody's Business, my team and I came up with that because we were like, what do we call this now? Like, what feels kind of fun and sassy? And like, we looked up the historic phrase of that, which is something that people in the US used to say in like, I think it was like after the Great Depression or something, where they would say, doing this thing like nobody's business, it was like a thing. I don't know what you call that. The word is escaping me. Like a metaphor kind of, but like a fun, sassy metaphor, to mean basically like no one else, like nothing else, right? And so because my mission through my company WMNûp is really about helping women create distinct businesses that are a unique expression of them and their unique work in the world, it felt like Nobody's Business is a fun way to really empower women to see things differently, to expand their vision, to find their own aligned path, to not do it like anybody else's, but also do it in a way that's so successful that no one else can touch it. That's like it's
Yeah.
so theirs. It's so unique to them. So that was a little bit of what it is, what it's about, and then it's a combination of on a technical level, like solo episodes, and some guest interviews, and sometimes we feature clients and members of our Women Up community and things like that to help actually give to help share the stage and the mic for the women who we support and who support our business as you know a way to spotlight them, highlight them, and also in part have them give a little bit of an idea of like why they joined and who they are and what the experience has been like, almost like a part testimonial, part spotlight. So that's been,
Mhm.
I think, a really nice thing that we've implemented too.
Yeah, and I think very powerful content as well. Okay, so I've heard you say a few times that innovation is super important, right? It's super important for the podcast because, after doing your last podcast for a few years, it was like, okay, what can we improve? Not necessarily even improve, but what we can just switch up, right? How can we innovate? How can we just be a little bit different? And then also, providing that insight for your listeners, how your guest and you are different and how your businesses are different. I think that's super interesting. And I am that brings up so many questions for me, but maybe the first thing I think is really interesting. You started with one podcast that you did for several years and then decided to go a different direction and, innovate. And I think a lot of podcasters, well, actually, a lot of people who have come on this show, on the Podcast Babes, have gone through something similar, right? There's very often some kind of pivot or change or redirection that our guests have been through. And what I thought was really interesting from your experience with this is that you chose to start a new podcast with a new feed, clean slate, start from scratch. Can you talk a little bit more why you decided to do that versus, keeping the feed, maybe just like a name change or something like that, which is also an option, right? And I know that, some people choose for that, some people choose for a new feed. So what made you decide to go this way?
hmm Yeah, it's a great question because we kind of weighed all of the options and went back and forth on it a lot. And, now I'm like, should we have done it that way? I think I felt like it was more an energetic choice for me to feel like there was a clean slate and a clean break and a new beginning, truly, that attracted a different audience potentially that the old show wasn't really speaking to directly. And at the time, I was really in the midst of a big evolution in my business. I was rebranding my personal brand. This was before I created the Woman Up brand, and it kind of led to that unfolding. But as a personal brand, I was seeking to distance myself from. I had probably over relied on the way that I was positioning myself as like a soulful leadership coach and business coach, and not really speaking directly to the like powerful actual business strategy that I'm so good at with clients. And so it was kind of getting lost, I think, or it was speaking to a different client than the client that I felt like I really wanted to be working with at the time, who really valued that part of my work that I loved so much, that gave me so much, fuel. And that was really aligned with my zone of genius. So and because we had had so many episodes over the course of like, what is that, 5 years or 4 or 5 years, that it felt like an old identity for me almost, that kind of needed to be shed. And some of those episodes were things that maybe I no longer really aligned with or wouldn't have invited someone to have that conversation on the podcast at this point in 2021 when things started to shift. So that's kind of the reason, but I think it was a hard decision because I was like, okay, do we lose all the people who are probably already subscribed, or do we just keep going? But then does it really mean the same thing to me if we just keep going and adding on? So I'm not sure if if I'd give the same advice to everyone, but that was my process. And I
Yeah.
don't know. In terms of it working out, I'm not honestly, with the podcast, I'm like, I don't really care about the metrics. I'm weird like that. I just do it because I love it. I want to have the conversations. I want to like spotlight people. I want to have them share it with their people. I want to spotlight our members. I want to have this direct line of communication that people can binge if they want to really get a feel for me as a coach and as a mentor and as a strategist and as a leader. So it's a prerequisite before they would, or give them a really clear picture, like hearing my voice, spending that time with me, whether I'm a good fit for them or not, whether they're a good fit for me or not. And, I don't really pay attention to the metrics that much. I would rather just know that the work that I'm doing feels really good to me and then release the outcome when it comes to the podcast.
Hmm.
And most things in my business, I'm like, of course, I care about the results and like how it all adds up. But I also know that a lot of these things, they're long term ROI. We're not going to see like necessarily immediate sales and turnaround when we're creating a resource for people that becomes a nurturing tool for a long time and builds a body of work that we're proud to stand behind and represent. So maybe that's weird. I don't know. I'm
I
like,
think,
you know, this is not my zone of genius to know analytics and metrics and like to even pay attention to that. But like once a year or so, or like twice a year or so, I'll ask my assistant who like handles the whole podcast to be like, hey, how are our listens doing? Like, what's getting the most? Like let's try to align with that or like take that data and use it in terms of creating content that people are loving or that they're really finding value from, but that's also hard to track, so
mhm.
it's not necessarily the whole picture.
That's
So
the thing with podcasting, I think, because like you said, it is mostly a nurture tool for most of our clients as well.
mhm,
And that also means that what makes someone decide to become a client in your business? Well, is it just the podcast? Probably not, but it
mhm.
helps. So,
Yeah,
how do you track that? It's very complicated.
right.
But it's just one thing you can do to provide that long form content and to inspire people, like you said, to also network with people in your industry, have amazing guests on, highlight your clients. It's all
Mhm,
extremely valuable. And I think it's really good to hear that you're so focused on the quality and the impact of the work versus how many people are listening to this.
mhm,
Because I see for a lot of our clients, the people will come if you are, if it's very aligned with your brand. And also, often, it doesn't even really matter how many people are listening if the right people are listening. I think it's
yes.
something that we often forget as podcasters, like
Mhm,
millions of listeners, cool, but are these actual ideal clients for you? Like, would you want to work with these people? Probably
mhm.
not with all millions and millions of them. So then maybe it's way more powerful to have a select group of loyal listeners who are ideal clients and who would then also, after a while, sign up to work with you.
Absolutely. And it's hard. Like sometimes, we all probably feel like we're speaking into the void and we're like, is anyone actually listening on the other side of this? Because really it's like me and my microphone,
Yeah.
kind of weird. But I think that, every time someone does tell me like, oh, I listened to your podcast, I'm like kind of shocked. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Thank you for listening. It's like such a treat to hear that. And I think if we can approach it from a space of gratitude like that and feel like it's really a gift that someone has. I mean, all of this technology is a gift. It's kind of crazy. Like never before have we had this opportunity to like literally have someone plug us into their AirPods, and go for a walk for hours with us in their ear, talking to them, building that relationship without us having to be present in real time, without us having to create like individual conversations. That's incredible. And I think sometimes we can get lost in all of the other parts of it and forget the magic of that and the power of that, which is so huge, like imagine you're like that, even if that happened with 10 people, that's huge. That's amazing. If someone actually tunes in and listens to you talk about something you care about, like if you put those people in a room, it would feel much more significant to know that you're having that like impact, or that, you're having that conversation with them. So I always try to reframe it for myself and remember that, because, also you keep the conversation going, you
Yeah.
have, they can tune back in, or like maybe one week is the topic they're not really that curious about, but the next week they're like, oh, I'm not sure I recognize that person, or like, let me hear more about that story, or let me hear more about this, solo episode on like things you need to, belief systems you need to break up with if you're serious about scaling and things like that. So it can, and it works for a long time, right? It like builds this momentum and it compounds, because somebody, could come scroll through your feed 2 years in who's a perfect ideal client. And I know how this happens sometimes. Like the highest ticket clients, the highest quality clients are often like the people I really want to work with in high level spaces and like close proximity spaces in my business. They're the ones who are like, okay, cool. Like, I already know you. I already like you. I already trust you. I filled out the application. I'm ready to pay. I listened to like 10 hours of you talking on your podcast, and here I am,
Yeah.
and I'm ready. And it feels like they drop out of the sky, but actually they've been nurtured by multiple pathways, um, in order to end up filling out the application, or whatever the case may be. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely recognize that. I think for a lot of our clients, that's the same, right? Because it's such powerful content, like I already said, especially, you know, as a listener, if I can listen to your episodes, especially the episodes with your clients, for example, it
Hmm.
gives such a good image of you working with people, right? And it gives such a sneak peek. Like it's basically like this massive behind the scenes situation where you can be like, oh, so this is how Emily is as a coach. This is what she can do for
Hmm.
clients. Like it's so cool that you can just see all of that and hear all of that. So yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like the podcast definitely had a positive impact on your business. But you also mentioned that Woman Up was created after the podcast was created, right?
Hmm.
Um, can you share a little bit more about how kind of the business and a podcast exists together, or how does it work together? Because I think very often people have maybe a business and then start a podcast, but for you it was the other way around.
Hmm.
Yeah, so how does that work for you?
Yeah. So to be clear, I had a coaching business as a personal brand for 10, have had one for 10 years now. And Woman Up has kind of been this new evolution of that same work, but that feels more expansive, that feels like it actually touches that bigger vision that I'm moving toward, to help and empower and lift up and build and level up so many more women in the world, in business and beyond. So there's a big, big mission behind that felt like it was there, but it was kind of not as, it didn't have an identity before, that
Mhm.
was separate from my own individual self. And it felt like I needed that. And it felt like it clicked in. And with Like Nobody's Business, I think that was really like the catalyst for that, was feeling like, again, the work that I had been doing for so long I started to evolve and grow out of it. Like it felt like a layer to shed, and I was stepping into a new phase of my evolution with my work. And so Like Nobody's Business felt like the first, almost like, public acknowledgement of that, like launching this new podcast under this new name. It felt like this new expression of my brand and myself and my work that was really more true to who I am. That felt even more aligned with who I'd become in the last, at that point, like 7 years, of doing this work consistently. So yeah, it felt like it was a little bit more sassy, like a little bit more like bold, a little bit more
Yeah.
clear, a little bit more powerful, like versus just soft and like feminine, even though feminine doesn't necessarily only mean soft, and we know that. But, it felt like a departure from where I'd been and a declaration of where I'm going next. And so the way that I like to think of business as an ecosystem, both for myself and my clients. So I look at the bigger picture of things, like how do all of these different parts of the ecosystem interact and harmonize with each other? And so the podcast, in my mind, and we could definitely be doing a better job of this, and we will be because we're building things behind the scenes right now to kind of like have a really clear pathway for people to deepen and come into our ecosystem in a free way, that's more organized and streamlined than it has been before. So, like, you know, typical stuff. It's like, yeah, if you want to come join the community, like here's I put like a little ad in there for a year or so, um, telling people about, the community, which is like our lowest ticket opportunity to come jump in with us. It's an all level space. It's like the membership model kind of. Um, so I had a commercial in there basically that I created. And then also we had like our lead magnet, which was, a free training or a template or something like that that people could find in the show notes and download. Now, what we're doing is we use the platform Circle for all of our other offers. So our community is hosted there. All of my courses and programs and experiences and masterminds and everything are in that system. And for a while, we've been figuring out like, how can we make this so streamlined and have it really work for us in a way that ascension is really natural, organized, easy, streamlined, all of that. And we, for some reason, had not been able to figure it out. Like now we're figuring it out, which is really exciting. And so that process now is going to look like they listen to the podcast, they're invited to this free space inside of Circle that's called Calibrate. And so essentially what that is like a couple free trainings, a video from me about what WMNûp is and our different offers and the different spaces that they can plug into. And we're also hosting a little thread about the podcast there. So we'll drop all the podcast episodes to kind of like loop them back to that so they don't miss anything, and also continue the conversation or gather like questions for Q&A episodes so that I have something to go off of, and it's a lot easier for me to jump on the mic solo and just answer a question or a bunch of questions, or to create a solo episode or a conversation that really addresses like a real concern from people who are in our like audience. So kind of tightening the gap between like that feedback loop, instead of having it feel like, hello, is anyone
Yeah.
listening? And like there's not really a clear pathway to be able to have a conversation about it. So we're creating that and building that out. And then we're also hosting a free 3-day virtual summit that'll also happen in that free space. So people can come through there and then they'll be looped back to the podcast. So they have access to a couple different opportunities to plug in with us for free, to get a taste of things and to experience it. And so the podcast is sort of this, it creates almost this like infinity loop, right? Because it's like either you start here and then you come into Calibrate and then you come back to the podcast and then maybe you do something else. But it allows them to be nurtured even better and more effectively and in a more streamlined way, where they're already in our primary ecosystem, and then our other opportunities are just laid out for them super clearly, and they know exactly where they can plug in if they want more. So that's one of the things that I'm really excited about personally right now. It's taken a while to really like get all the pieces plugged in and together, but my team and I are working on that now, and we'll be, releasing that probably this month in October.
Cool. Amazing. And I
Yeah.
love what you just shared, that the podcast is everywhere in your business, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
before people sign up for the community, but then also when they are in the community, and it's everywhere, which I think works. That's how it works best, if it's
Mm-hmm.
a really central part of the business and of the client experience. And I think that's something that often is room for improvement there for podcasters with the business, where maybe they don't share the podcast enough. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
so cool that all these new episodes that are just to feed in your community, so that people can just really easily listen to new episodes and they're always up to date. I think that's so smart. So that's really cool. And okay, so that's something that's new,
Mm-hmm.
that you're now implementing after years of podcasting. What are some other things that you've changed, from maybe it's or things that you learned from the last podcast that you had, or maybe it's like nobody's business, but can you give us some tips and tricks that you learned along the way?
Yeah, I think honestly, my biggest learning is keep it so simple. Like, don't let this be something that adds so much stress and pressure in a way that becomes unhealthy, you know?
Mhm.
Like, be consistent, but let it be easy. Like, repurpose content, have conversations you'd be having anyway, but record them.
Yeah.
Um, ask people what do they actually want to hear, like ask if they have any questions and then create a podcast episode out of it. When you notice a common thread on a client call or you notice something that you're observing or in a book that you're reading or something, like you can weave that in to build a podcast episode around it.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've done is I do daily coaching audio messages to my community members every single day this year, which has been really like a fun challenge for me. So sometimes what we'll do if we're like, my assistant's, it's like the final hour and she's like, do we have a podcast this week? We're like, no, like if something happens in our workflow and we forgot, because that can happen too, even though we have like a system in Asana and everything's super organized, sometimes it falls apart because that's life and business. So if and when that happens, we've figured out like an easy solution for two things. One, we can either download one of the daily coaching episodes and kind of repurpose that. I'll just record like an intro that's basically like, hey, here's the conversation. Here's a preview of daily coaching inside the community. And when you join us, you get access to this every single day. Conversations like this. We have, new episodes or new themes and topics every single month that we dive deeper into, but here's a taste and a sneak preview of what you can expect and what we're talking about this month that I think might be valuable for you. So I'll just do like a quick intro and I'll literally send it to her via Slack. And then she can take that audio message, take the clip from daily coaching, edit it together, put our intro, outro on, and it's done. It's like, wow, that took
Simple.
2 minutes, like that literally took 2 minutes for me to create. And even if I was still editing, because I was in the very, very beginning with my first podcast, and then I was like, I'm never touching this again. you know, um, Even if I had like a template that I just like plopped something into. So I think the more you can systematize, streamline, template things, because you're going to be doing this consistently, right? So we have like an email template for the podcast episodes that goes out once a week with the new info. We've got a space in our other email template that goes out that has a space for the podcast to be put in. We've got like templates for podcast episodes in our workflow in Asana. We've got a template for the actual editing the episode. Those kinds of things, if you're going to do them, you're going to do them every single week. So like don't make it harder than it needs to be. Just template it once and then keep going and use it. And then the other thing is sometimes, honestly, the best solo episodes I've ever done are literally in my car with my phone and nothing else. Just like a voice memo on my phone, me talking like I'm talking to someone when the inspiration strikes, or when I'm like, you know what, this would be a good idea, pull my car over, jot it down in the notes on my phone, like here are the 5 topics I want to hit, and then hit record and do it and get it done. Oh, sometimes we overcomplicate it so much. We think like, I know for a lot of people who are just starting their podcast or whatever, they're like, okay, I need the perfect mic and the perfect this. And then I have to have like a silent room and I have to rent a studio or something. Like people get, or like, I need this fancy editing, or I need to pay someone so much money to edit. And it's like, don't. Like it actually, I've always thought like it makes it so much more natural and normal and organic, and like you're actually talking to someone when it is like the voice memo on their phone and then you're getting it. Like you can't even really tell the difference. I don't. Like it doesn't bother me. I actually like to hear like, oh, my dog is rolling in the dirt right now. When somebody's recording their episode, I'm like, oh, I know that she has a dog. That's cool. I wonder what her dog's name is. Or like, oh, she has 3 cats. Or, oh, she lives in this place. And, every Thursday they do street sweeping, like whatever the thing is. I'm like, okay, yeah, that just sounds like a real human who now I am even more connected with, or I know who you actually are. And I find that vulnerability that happens just naturally when you're not trying to be performative or too perfect or too polished on the pod is more helpful for using it as a tool in your
Mhm.
business to nurture people, to let them actually see and feel you as you are. And that vulnerability can feel, or that authenticity can feel vulnerable, but also I think it's the best thing. Like, I don't know, it's not it's not auditorily that disruptive. It's just like pick what you're really going to care about the most. Is it perfect, production quality, or is it like the quality of content or the
Mhm.
authenticity? Like, what's your intention for your podcast? And then let everything else fall away. Like, as long as you're doing that, you're being successful, you're building something you're proud of that's aligned for you, and everything else is kind of irrelevant.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
my philosophy anyway.
Yeah, keep it simple, have clear
Yeah.
systems, right? I
Hmm.
also heard you say that, having templates or help if you can, but make sure that you have a super clear workflow with systems in place, which makes it so much more fun as well, in my experience. And
Hmm.
then I think the simplicity, I think that's a really, really good one. I think that's a big one, But
Hmm.
what I also hear you say, like yes, you keep it simple. And, the example that you shared, 2 minutes to record an intro for content that already exists. Just also want to point out that it is very strategic how you do it. So, it's not just, oh, I don't have anything. Well, I have 2 minutes. Let me just
Right.
record some random stuff, because I think that would probably not work as well. But,
Hmm.
as an experienced podcaster and you know your audience very well, it's very clear that you know your audience very well and this is what they want to hear and it leads back to that community again that you have. So it's just another sneak peek into that, which I think
Hmm.
is just so smart to you know, be super efficient in that way, but also be super strategic in that way as well.
Hmm.
So I think that's a big tip.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I want to say one more thing about that too, which is that when it's simple and fun and feels relatively easeful for you, like you actually enjoy it. So like there are so many things you could do to like make yourself suffer. This should not be one of them. Like this should be so fun for you. And I think when it is simple and when you do enjoy it, that's what creates the ease, even when things are challenging. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? The more you practice, the easier it is, the easier it becomes. And it
Mhm.
becomes easier to just like hit record and come up with something great because you're used to that. And I think a lot of people are intimidated at the beginning of like, how would I possibly commit to creating something every single week? And it's like, well, what else are you doing? Like this is actually the most important thing, and you can repurpose it from lots of different places. Like, what are you
Mhm.
already doing? You're already having client conversations every week. Well, great. Right after that, look at the notes, pull out something, and then talk about it while it's fresh for the
Mhm.
podcast. Like take an Instagram live that you did, repurpose it for the podcast. There's so many ways to like cross pollinate your content and reuse in a way that's super efficient, but also strategic, because I can guarantee you that like some of the things that I record, like an interview or something on Instagram Live with a client, like it's like a testimonial, right? And a whole long thing. It's like that ended up being 50 minutes. But like, I don't know, probably most people are not listening to 50 minutes of content on Instagram Live, but they will listen to that on the podcast. So can we take that and use it again? And also, oh, can we just put that on the sales page too? Because we can embed that on the sales page. That's social proof. That's a
Mhm.
client testimonial. So I share those examples to help people hopefully come up with their own version of that, where it's like, what actually could make this so easy and fun that it becomes a consistent thing that builds momentum, that then just becomes part of the routine. It's not like a
Mhm.
hard thing, because I think in the beginning it feels intimidating. It's new, just like anything. There's a learning curve. You're like, how would I possibly come up with this every week? Stay with it and keep keep experimenting. It doesn't have to look the same every single week. In fact, it's probably more interesting if it has variation, for people, or you test things and you then can be more strategic because you have more data, more information, both about what feels fun for you and what feels easy for you and what your people are loving the most. So,
Yeah. Progress over perfection, especially at the start, I would say.
yeah,
For sure.
just do it. Like a lot of times it's like, we'll create, and I see this so much in my work with women entrepreneurs too. It's like, we create all these excuses that sound really valid. It's like, well, I just don't know this yet, or I don't have the format figured out, or I don't have this, or I don't do that. I don't know. Well, I don't have the perfect mic. I'm waiting for it to come. It's not coming. It's back ordered for a month. Like whatever it is. So I can't start. It's like,
there's always something.
Just start.
Yeah.
Start in the most simple, easy way that you possibly can, and just do it. Get practice. Get good at it, and let it live. Let it live. And I think sometimes we hold back because we're so afraid of it not looking right, or not being perfect, or not being like someone else. And it's like, just do it your way. That's what we actually want from you. That's what the world wants from you, is your unique voice being shared in your unique way. And you leading your business and creating your business and building your business like nobody else can, because they're not you. So be more you. Just do it. Like, be brave. Take the bold action and do it. You're not going to see any results. You're not working toward results if you're not doing it.
Exactly. 100%. I absolutely agree. And if you want to hear more of Emily's unique voice, then go check out the podcast. Good bridge, I think, for the end.
Yeah, I love
it. Like Nobody's Business. We'll also link it in the show notes, including Emily's website. So you can find everything about Emily and her work there as well. But I also highly recommend just giving the podcast a listen, because I think it's super valuable and inspiring content. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was so good to hear about your podcast journey, about the tips that you can share. I loved your tips on, keeping it simple, having systems in place, but you're also super strategic with the podcast. And I think that only comes from experience, right? You've been doing this for years and years. So yeah, I think this was a super valuable episode for everyone listening today. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Need some help to get your podcast off the ground? Not sure where to start and what to focus on? Go to thepodcastbabes.com to schedule a call and learn more about our podcast launch and production services. See you next week.